welcome back to PA Chalk Up. I'm your host Manny, and today we have Tofi. How we doing?
Good, Manny. How are you, man?
I'm good. Obviously, you joined us for our first ever webinar, so we kind of already know you. But if you give us a little introduction on who you are, what you do, and how you got to where you are. As a strength coach and a business owner, my time is quite limited. My favorite part about being a coach is the fact that I get to interact with athletes and be with athletes and really coach them. That's why I use Teambuildr. I remember the days of searching for exercises, manually typing them in, and spending hours on spreadsheets and organizing my programs. This tends to be quite tedious and a lot of time consuming, which meant that I wasn't able to coach as much. So now for my business, Teambuildr is a non-negotiable. It's an all-in-one programming platform that lets you create and deliver workouts to your athletes just in a few clicks. With Teambuildr, I can customize programs, track athletes' progress in real time, and generate performance reports. My athletes get full ownership of their progress and can even share feedback on how they felt the session's going. Having this in place actually gives me more time to coach and be with my athletes. If you're ready to take your next step in your programming, give more time to your athletes, head over to teambuildr.com and use promo code PACHALKUP, that's PACHALQUP, and start your 30-day free trial.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I started out my strength and conditioning journey post college. Was in predominantly general population in Boston for about a year and a half, and then with my athletic background, I kind of had the itch to get back into some sort of competitive environment because predominantly, like I said, it was just general population. I wasn't doing anything in the athletic sphere, so decided to go back study for master's in exercise science. Wound up with an internship at Yale University. Spent the better part of 6 years there. Started as an intern that summer of 2017. Stuck around, thankfully. The staff at the time wanted to kind of keep me around, so I picked up a part-time role coaching or being the strength coach for the rugby team, and kind of just trying to make ends meet. And then was offered a part-time spot, working with 6 teams at the Ivy League, and then eventually worked into a full-time spot after a year there. So worked with every team from pretty much sailing to football to to swimming and dive to fencing to the ice hockey programs, the golf programs, you name it. I mean, being in an Ivy institution, you're pretty much in the mix with everybody. So it was really great to kind of see just all the cultures there and how people approach the weight room from different backgrounds and what teams bring what attitude to the weight room and kind of how that can be molded. So spent some great, like I said, great 6 years there. Eventually became the head of sports science for my final two there, working with all the information, the tech, the data for pretty much all the teams. And then was able to come on and join Teambuildr. And I've been there for about 2.5 years now. Started as the head of sports science and just stepped into a product management role here and kind of helping with the process of feature rollouts and designing and planning and implementing. So it's definitely been quite the career, especially starting
Mhm.
in a very unorthodox background and kind of making my way here now. So, but yeah,
Yeah, I mean, the good thing that I've always said about TeamBuilder is they don't rely on outside people to tell them what to do within the industry.
yeah,
That we're like serious coaches and we've worked at really high levels, and now we're just in a role where we can make something that we wish we had at the time. At least that's how I feel.
I mean, that's a great way to put it, honestly. it's it's everything that you wish you could have had.
Hmm.
And you're like, if we just did this way, if we just had this way, like that would have saved us so much time or just been so much easier. So, I mean,
Yep,
we have a lot of those conversations. So,
100%. And like stuff like I had Grace previously on. I speak to
mhm.
Rachel a lot. Melissa, like there's some fucking stacked team members that were just like at our disposal and we can just bounce ideas off each other. And like I'll have Alex sort of reach out to me. I was like, hey, this is what we're doing. What's your thoughts? Or Jasmine, what's your thoughts on this? And it's like I think that's how it should, like an application for this space should be led by the coaches that coach.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, and I mean, all different backgrounds too, right? Like we've had people that have owned their own gym. We've had people that have worked in the college, professional, the high school setting. Like we've had people pretty much almost the whole gambit of
Mhm.
sectors within this profession, right? So it's like it's tough because like athletics is as large as athletics is, it's just a small community, and it's like if you know, and this goes back to our time at Yale, like Tom Newman would always say, like it's not really a job, it's a lifestyle. You know what I mean? Like you have
Mhm.
to really kind of understand the inner workings of it, and it's such a huge commitment, and it really becomes like a part of who you are for quite a bit of time. So it's like, you know, if you don't have that kind of like understanding, if you didn't walk, you know, a mile in a
Mhm.
coach's shoes, it's hard to really get into that mindset because it's just it is different. It is very
Mhm.
very different. It's niche, right?
It's
So
it's the pacing of it as well. Like people like have to go out in and out of tabs and different drop downs and whatnot. Like as a weight room coach, and you have to like 100 odd athletes all in one session. Your processes have to be very dialed in, so
yeah.
that 45 to 1 hour session can actually last that time.
Oh yeah. And it's I mean that 45 to 1 hour, that's a show. You know what I mean? Like that's their
Mhm.
time, right? That's the athlete's time, and it's you know, you're kind of almost on a stage, right? Like it's, you know, whatever happened the hour before or whatever's going to happen the hour
Mhm.
after, like that team that's in that room that you're with, like that's their time, right? Like that's they're there, they're giving you their effort and their time
Mhm.
to better themselves, and you have to be respectful of that. And you kind of just like you have to commit yourself to being present, being available, and kind of giving your energy in that hour. And you know, I'm sure many strength coaches that are listening to this are like, you know, that's your fourth or fifth straight lift, right? And it's just,
Mhm.
you know, you got to show up. You have to show up, and it's, you know,
Yeah.
that's the tough part, right? So
That brings me on to my next question. And because Yale is an Ivy League type school, there's no athletic scholarships per se. So how does
right.
that sort of go from full time studying to then having that sport as like a almost a side project for the athletes there?
Yeah, I that's it's funny you say that because like when I would bring that up, people would be like, "What do you mean they don't have scholarships?" Like, I mean, their scholarships and their aid comes from like academics and other opportunities, but like not through athletics. Like, you can't get a full ride because you're an athlete. Um, so I mean, like, really, what you see is, I mean, you do definitely see people that like want to be there because they want to be there, but you also see the other side of it where it's like people are there because they feel like they're fulfilling, you know, a role that they signed up for, and it's kind of like you can definitely get people that get stuck in the motions of it. um, so you know, really when you're looking at an institution like Yale, you're getting a lot of people that come in that are predominantly high performers in most every aspect of their life. Like it's very hard to get there. It's very hard to stay there. You know, it's one of those institutions and instances where you kind of have to allow for some flexibility and autonomy for people to kind of create their, maybe not create their own path, but there's definitely going to be a lot more feedback opportunity, and people are going to be willing to kind of voice their opinions, voice kind of like what they'd like to see. So I think approaching a community where it's all really, I don't want to say volunteer because like, you know, I think they go above just volunteering, right? Where they're dedicating themselves to a portion of their already very busy schedule to be a part of something outside of really what they're there for, and that's education, right? Um, you're going to need to be open and available to having conversations with them about like what their training needs and what they feel their training needs
Mhm.
are. And you may not always get that with at every institution. You wouldn't necessarily get that with every single athlete that walks through the door, but I think that's kind of there were definitely a lot of opportunity, and there was a lot of instances where it was more feedback based at certain
Yeah.
times, and then allowing for that to happen, and then being comfortable with hearing feedback on yourself as a professional from people that would otherwise, you know, just be looking for a training goal, right? So
Mhm.
I think that's where you know, I think that's what maybe sets apart some of the attitude, which is nice because like if someone's dedicated enough to give you feedback, that means they you know, they want to be there, right? They want to
Mhm.
be there. They want to see something. So I would say that's definitely one of the unique experiences I think that you know, being in an Ivy League probably drew up for sure.
Yeah. With I mean, with the level of education that they're in, you will get more of those critical thinkers that actually want to know everything that goes into their program. How is it sort of justifying what you're doing program wise, but then also the statistics that go behind like their GPS tracking or their wearing volume. How does that sort of tie in to the demands and what explanations you have to go into?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely got a lot of the, hey, like, can I see my numbers? Like, hey, what does X, Y, and Z mean? Like, hey, why are you collecting this? Which is great because it's engagement. Like, you can have
Mm,
conversations. And I mean, for us, we spent a lot of time on the front end planning out what we were going to collect, when we were going to collect it, why we were going to collect it. So, like, we had a lot of the answers for them already ready to go and canned.
mhm,
I think that's what one thing that I think our staff did really well was planning for testing, planning for every kind of instance that we could think of, and every sort of conversation that we thought could drum up from collecting information or testing or whatever it may be. We spent a lot of time, pre return to campus, whether it be the winter or the summers, just kind of going through scenarios and talking through like why we would want to collect something, why we should show this versus showing this, right, to the athletes that we're serving. So we were pretty pointed in what we collected, showcased, and talked about, and that helped us in those conversations, right? Because athletes would inevitably ask, like, "Hey, what does this number mean? Why are we doing this?" And if we had a couple numbers that correlated, like we could say, "Hey, like if we better ourselves here, we actually see some increases over here, right? We may not be
mm,
doing this, let's say like, we may not be sprinting right now, but like sprint times, based on this exercise for your team and you specifically also like seem to improve, even though we may not be sprinting at this time because like it's just not the right time to be sprinting, not the right time of season, right? So, um, it's things like that. It's having the numbers ready and the conversations already pre thought out. And obviously you
mm.
can't account for everything, but you're really only as
You've had
confident as
as
you
much
are
as you want.
prepared. Yeah.
Hmm.
So
Yeah. How does sort of building those type of dashboards and stuff then lead you to a place like Teambuilder where you're going from essentially like the mock-ups of what we see as coaches and why it's important for us to sort of use.
yeah, I try to think back to a lot of like the first series of conversations we'd have when presenting the information, right?
Mm,
Like, what's the minimal effective dose to start a conversation? Um, and then what leads to more productive conversations, like what information did and how it was presented. That's what I try to like refer back to. Um, because towards the end, like, we started to get into more advanced things with certain teams for certain coaches, but like, if you are trying to kind of elicit change, it has to start pretty minimal sometimes. So it's like, what's the minimal effective dose and how it should be portrayed, and what's easy for a lot of people that may not be data driven to consume to
mm,
start. So that's kind of where I think back to a lot.
yeah. And what when you're looking at minimal effective dosages and what is the basics and the low hanging fruit, how do you sort of formulate that plan and then implement them with different teams?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with like the initial conversation, right? I think it's almost like doing a needs assessment for the team, and then doing the needs assessment through like what's going to be supported by the coach, right? Because you can come in with every metric, A through Z, but if the coach isn't going to support A through Z, they may only support like the middle of the alphabet there, right?
Mhm,
Like, then you should focus your time on that because that might be the gateway to what opens up the rest of the alphabet, right? Of like the metrics that you can examine and showcase that may lead to different changes, right? So I think, base one, like no exposure to information or anything like that, with a team, like starting out with what they feel is important to track, and that may not be right, wrong, from a research standpoint, from a application standpoint, but it's what they value, and showing interest in the things that teams value will open up doors for more conversations because they're only going to trust you as much as you trust them. So it's kind
mm,
of like that cyclical process of like building trust, building relationship, and then data doesn't speak for itself. Like, data opens a conversation, right? Like, it's you can't just show somebody a plot and be like, all right, here's the numbers, and then walk out of the room.
mhm,
Like, that's that's just not how this industry works. That's not how many industries work. I don't feel, but it's just starting with a conversation there is always a great point, especially if you're inserting yourself into a new staff or if a new staff's coming in. I
mm,
mean, you really have to kind of drive in, show what you've done, but like be open to what they feel is important, whether you feel it's just as vital.
When we're sort of talking about like speaking to coaches and sort of presenting these figures, I know obviously not every sport will be data driven. So
Right.
how do you have that conversation and open up those doors to coaches who are still perhaps like, no, I just need them to perform?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think and that comes down to like what performance really is in that sport, right? Sometimes performance is subjective. Sometimes performance is very quantifiable, right? Like I think of almost like a sport like track.
Mm.
The time is the time, the
You either
distance is
win
the
or lose.
distance. Yeah, there's you can't really skirt around anything there. So, um, but I mean, then you have uh, positional players in sports where you can't really necessarily quantify their performance outright, right? Like you might find, and I mean, this is a good example, but someone like our at the time for football, our star linebacker Foye, um, didn't have the craziest stats his senior year, but like a lot of teams just avoided him on the field. You know what I mean? So it's like
Mm,
performance wasn't statistically quantifiable, but like if you saw a lot of the packages that they ran, like they just avoided him. So I think in saying that, again, it kind of comes back to conversations of like identifying what performance is for a particular individual. Is it subjective? Is it objective? Can you apply a value to it? And then with that value, can you tack on another value that you could track inside of the weight room or even outside of the weight room to
mm,
apply just like another value to tack on to performance for them? It's almost like, I mean, something like golf, like sure, like, you know, we would track like drive distance over time as like a metric of strength, right? Because like we weren't going to one rep max anybody, but like if for a total distance on a drive or irons or whatever it may be, like we were lucky enough to have a trackman there. But like that's an easy performance metric, and you can say like, hey, well, the numbers in the weight room went up, right? And so did distance, right? And it could be as simple as like overall volume in the weight room just went up. It doesn't have to be tied to a
mm,
specific number, right? It's more so that like obviously progressive overload, especially for someone that doesn't have a huge training background, right? Like you say, like, hey, total volume in the weight room up. So it's like we say we want to push ourselves. Like, how much do we want to push ourselves? And the people that did really kind of go above and beyond, like this is what changes were led to, right? So something as simple as that,
yeah.
right? Which may not be like a pure performance metrics because it may not lead to um, wins in the win column, right? But you can at least point to something where it's like that arguably could be more effective for that
Mhm.
person's game.
Yeah. So I spoke with Steph Mock, now Grubs, and she imposed this super important question in our field, and it's like we need a way to assess our if we were successful or unsuccessful that season, because
Mhm.
like it's all fine to either win all season, but
Right.
you can also still be a shit coach and win depending on your
Sure.
staff. Or the other way, you can lose every game, but actually all your numbers have went up. Everything performance wise has went up. And maybe if you look at score percentages, you probably didn't lose as much compared to last year or the year before that. So it's like it's exactly what you're saying. Is like how do we as a industry sort of look at how effective or ineffective we've been for that season?
Yeah, I mean it's a great point. Like, and I think a lot of it comes down to the not necessarily need for added value, but I think it's just a way to showcase that like even when things are negative, like there's still some positives to be had.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, I think back to a time where I started working with the women's ice hockey program at Yale, and historically, they really hadn't had a lot of storied success in like the wins column, right? So, really, like my first kind of exposure as like a true coach was saying, all right, well, what's going to be the most effective thing I can do right now? And it was a showcasing that I cared, right? In their training and their progression, right? And I rolled out something, maybe, and I mean looking back, maybe I rolled out something a little bit too like advanced. I probably tried a little bit too hard in the programming that I did, but like my key focus was just making sure when they left that the weight room was picked up, and right, because it just wasn't when I first got there. It just like they kind of left it in disarray, didn't leave it better than they found it. So, I mean, small things like that, like you can point to a coach and even if it's just like, hey, the first day you step in the weight room, you take a picture of how it's left and then send it to the coach, be like, hey, this just isn't acceptable. And then,
Mhm.
3 weeks later, you send them another picture like, hey, they great lift today, everything went well. Like even though we may not be on a winning streak right now, like they're taking care of their space, and like
Mhm.
culturally that makes so much more sense, right? Like that's such a small thing of being like, hey, look, like we're instilling this value or kind of culture of like we need to take care of the things we can control, and what we can control in this moment here is how we leave our space, right? Because it
Mhm.
was their space. It was a weight room in a rink. Um,
Yeah.
so I mean, granted, that's not easy to quantify, and like you can't quantify that over season. But
I
like if
mean,
you're,
there's
if you're trying to find
have you
positives and negatives there,
have you ever read the book Peak Performance?
I don't believe so. No, who's a buy?
I'll get up. So essentially, one of my favorite parts about this book was the breakdown of um, the British cycling team. So they were a laughing stock. Um, like they try to get up. Um, so they were a laughing stock in the cycling world for just always losing. But a coach came across, and all he did was just make 1% of one thing better each week or each day, and that was as simple as like as soon as you finish wash in the bathroom, wash your hands.
Mm-hmm.
That led to a big impact of athletes being available because they weren't sick. Um, Again, 1% better seating
Yeah.
for their bikes, 1% better on the gears, just chipping off that 1%, which accumulated over a long period of time, as you know, makes the biggest differences. So for me, I always look at exactly what you said is like, although cleaning up the weight room isn't a big thing, but aesthetically, as soon as you walk in, you know you're ready to perform because like there's no mess, there's no clutter. At UW or under Coach Ron's guidance, you've always got dubs up. So the W's always have to be up, or the A's, whatever it is at this point. And it's something so minor because all you're having to do is just turn a plate, but aesthetically everything looks the same. Everything looks ready to use, ready to perform. When we leave the weight room for the next day, it's already set up for the next day. So all we have to do is get in, put Perch Teambuildr up, and fucking play because
Yeah.
that's all that's left. And again, it's that thing. And P.S. I've spoke to some of the interns from Yale, and I've become very familiar with the drills of cleaning the room
Yeah. Oh yeah.
and
Yeah.
tidying
Yeah.
up.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh
So
yeah.
I know
It's,
the performance base there as well. Like
yeah.
and Tom's always said this, and I kind of mentioned at the start. Like he's he's been helping me a lot with sort of how I should look at things and how my work is organized and what I do. And it's like he essentially said, like you have to look at yourself as a professional in the profession and coach industry. So it's not like so you've got like obviously your elite athletes, but if we think about it deep down, we're elite coaches, right? Because we've worked in a performance and we want to hold ourselves to a certain standard that high level coaches aspire to be. So for us, it's having that mentality of we're here, so everything I do has to match that sort of expectancies.
No, absolutely. Like that's and it's one of those things where um it's almost like a barometer, right? We would use it as like
Hmm.
a temperature check, right? And you can start I mean you really like you pay attention to like how the athletes a react over time because generally what happens is like, you get this quick surge, right? Of just like not necessarily compliance, but like they're like, okay, I see why this is important, right? You'll get this like all right, they take
Hmm.
ownership of it, and then it's like things start to change culturally, and like they might drop off a little bit. But like what we would like to do is like, are the are the senior leaders or the juniors taking hold and ownership of the process now to say like, no, like this is the direction we want our team to go in. Most every team wants to hold themselves accountable, be successful, right? And when things start to flip and turn and they start to see how like their attitude can kind of breed this culture of
Hmm.
success, like that's when they really start to like dig in. And the teams that really kind of functioned at a high level and did well, if anything just like wasn't up to the standard that we set, a lot of the senior leaders would step in and be like, hey, like that's not us, like we gotta, like this is the
Hmm.
way we do things, like sure, we can joke around and have a good time, like it's not all serious, all business all the time, but like there's a time and place, and this is something we don't bend on, right? We don't flex on.
Hmm.
So I think really like that almost becomes our gauge or temperature check of like where the team's at. Like if they start to leave things a mess and like no one's saying anything, like it's time for me to like step in as a coach and be like, look, like all the things that we're doing don't necessarily matter if we can't take care of the foundation, right? So it's like
100%.
these are our foundations, our foundational stuff. Like these are the things that we can stick by, win, loss, or indifferent. Like it doesn't matter. Like these are the things that we can do and can control right now. And the other thing too,
Mhm.
it's like if they don't care about their space, like they're not going to care about the numbers that you tell them about necessarily, right? They might want to see like, yeah, am I improving? Sure, but like there's a difference between like, oh, great, like numbers are going in this direction or that direction, or there's like, that's awesome. I want to do more now. Like, what's the next step, right? Because if they don't have that drive or that kind of like inherent understanding of like those standards of continued evolution or succession, you know, it's just going to be like, oh yeah, met
Mhm.
expectations. Expectations are to improve, right? I don't think you can ever walk into a team and be like, hey, like, what are your expectations in the weight room? They're like, stay the same, get worse, right? No one's ever going to say that. The expectation is minimal.
Yeah.
It's to improve in something, right? But
Mhm.
like then to want to continue on and evolve, like that's it takes a mindset sometimes.
100%. I've actually just spoke to one of my coaches today, and he was, and it goes back into that leadership and how expectations matter. And like the season that we had him as a coach, we fucking won everything, and it was the same team that had been playing together for a while. So it wasn't like something done extra or we had
Right.
more players come in. But the thing for him was we can fuck around as much as we want before, in between, and after. But like when it's go time, it's fucking go time. And like we carried on a little bit sometimes, and we saw the wrath that came afterwards. So like yeah, we should maybe just pay attention and just like listening to what he's saying. But it's exactly what you're saying. Like the leadership of the coaches to their athletes and being like, okay, I'm happy enough to mess around and joke around and play, dance, whatever it may be during our down times. But when I'm expecting you to perform, let's really fucking perform. And then that again sets out this thing where they know they can have fun. But hey, when coach says let's go, it's fucking let's go.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's what you want, and like that's I can think back to like the men's lacrosse team when they won the national championship. Like that was almost like the exact to the T same environment, right? Like they were great to be around. They were fun to be around in the weight room because they loved it. But like when they were like as soon as that whistle blew to start the lift, like it was the lift. You know what I mean? Like that's
Mhm.
just what it was. So
Yeah. Talk a little bit about that because I know there's quite a lot of history with the lacrosse team going
sure.
from losing to winning. How was it to sort of program and sort of put these performance metrics in it for them? And what sort of increases and decreases did you see during that stint?
Yeah. So I mean, I came on like at a very fortunate time, right? Because I came on in the summer of 2017 and 2018, the spring of 2018, that season. That's when they won. So a lot of like the
So it
cultural
was all
values were
Tofi.
there. No, God, no, it's Tom Newman. Rerun the tape there. No, it was I mean the thing that we did implement that was new that season was that fatigue monitoring, right? Like
Mm.
the fatigue based lift prescriptions in season, and that
Flexible
really,
non-linear.
yeah, flexible nonlinear, man. Like I will, that is the hill I will die on. It's a
Mhm.
phenomenal way to run a program.
So,
uh
fun fact, because me and Tom have been speaking quite a lot, like I've sat in on some of his calls with his athletes, and just to watch the process of like, okay, if you're at close to 100%, this is the
mm,
program that you do. If you're at like 50 to 70, this is the program that you do. If you're anything below, this is the program that you do. Like, it does take a little bit extra on the back end, but it fucking
mm.
makes it so much worth it.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's just, and it's an easy way to have like, again, to go back to like data leads to conversations. It's an easy way to be like, you'll hear a lot of people say like, kids come in, they say they're so tired, and then they hit a PR. Well, it's like we saw that, right? Like
Mhm,
we'd have kids come in and they would say their fatigue levels are like 7, 8. They're like, oh, I feel like I didn't get enough sleep. I felt like I was restless. But then they go and jump for
mhm,
their day, and they're at 101. You know what I mean? And it's like they're like, I didn't think I could do that. You know what I mean? It's like then you put them in a lift where they can succeed and push even further. Like that's a
mhm,
double win, right? Not only did they think that like they couldn't do something that day, um, but they were able to. They set a PR in their jump, and then they could probably PR in the weight room if they wanted to. Like midway through the season, with the men's hockey team, I had a kid was able to add 5 pounds to their their power clean, but they jumped like 105. They set like a inch PR on their vert that day, and they were like, oh, I didn't think I could do that. And you're like, well, I mean, the numbers told me you were
Mhm.
fresh, right? So like you probably were in a state where you could. But then you also have the other side of things where it's like kids come in and like 3 or 4 days in a row, they're just like they're in the red, and you're like, all right, what are you doing? Like what's going on?
Mhm.
Like you say you have all these goals and aspirations, but like what's going on behind the scenes? Because like right now it's telling you, it tells me that these numbers tell me you're not functioning at the level that you might expect yourself to function at, and you can see it in the lift performance too. Like at a certain point, like you can absolutely mentally power through a lot of things, but only for so
Mhm.
long. Like you can redline a car for days, but like at a certain point, like something's gonna blow, right? So that's kind of like the way we would think about it. It's like do we feel comfortable enough putting this person in a situation where they can push themselves, or do we feel comfortable enough to say like I don't think they're going to recover in time for them to need to perform. So um, yeah, I mean, it's a great way to have a conversation to be like, hey, look, like these are the things that need to change in order for you to see the performances that you want to see, right? You might feel sluggish on the field, where you're going to feel sluggish in the weight room too, probably because we're seeing it. So,
Mhm.
um, but yeah, I mean, it's that whole kind of like lift prescription is great. I mean, granted, there's not a one way to do everything, and context is key, but um, you know, for us, like that really helps. Like it really helped to a have conversations, but b know when to push and when to pull back,
Mhm.
especially in season, because like you can set PRs all you want in the weight room, but like if they're going out on the weekends and being like, hey, my legs are dead, well, that's not going to help, right? So yeah, it's once it starts to click in everyone's kind of like mind, and like, oh wow, like I can I know when I can push, and I know when I should pull back in the weight room specifically. um it just makes things easier overall. So
Yeah, you also did quite a bit of work with the rugby.
mhm.
Rugby was my sport, anyways.
Right.
So, what were some of the things that you looked at or implemented as you were going through their programs?
Um, honestly, like for me, that they were club at Yale.
Mhm.
So it was obviously like they technically paid money, I believe, to be there, right? You know what I mean? Like they had to like fund their own, granted fundraising and stuff, but like at the end of the day, like it's up to them to be able to get to the
Mhm.
games they want to go to, and all that. So it's like that's a little bit of a different element. So I mean, for me, a lot of it was just to be like, hey, we're here. Like, I'm going to be here for you. Like, you're not a club team anymore. Like, you're D1 along with every other athlete that steps in this weight room, right? So like we can say all we want to do is just show up and play, or we can put some work in. Like I remember the first thing that I did with that team is they all had to have the same color shirt, right, to be
Mhm.
able to enter the weight room. They couldn't, because that's what we did with our varsity teams. Like they got handed gear, um, and I didn't care necessarily what logo was on the front, or as long as it wasn't anything obscene. But it's like if we were going to wear blue and somebody shows up in a blue PSG jersey, like I didn't care. It just showed that
Mhm.
they were committed to setting a standard for themselves. And then if everyone was squared away and we got through the warm up and we were happy and ready to go, then we were ready to go. Like I didn't run anything necessarily fancy. I don't think I did anything groundbreaking with the training. We didn't do nonlinear. They weren't in the weight room enough in season, right? So it was like because there was much more of like it's a club team. Like
Mhm.
their commitment was academics wholeheartedly, and they played rugby on the side, and they were a great group to be around. They were a lot of fun, but I mean, for me, like I mean, I can't really say that I did anything groundbreaking or I did
Mhm.
anything that would be
I
beneficial
would
to rugby coaches right now.
I would challenge that, and it's the expectation thing that you put on them.
Hmm.
And that's one thing that I learned from the US. It's the cohesion of expectations and how that leads to better success. And like it can be something as minor as walking in and being like, "Hey, everyone's wearing blue today. To step into through that door, you're wearing blue," and then following that, and again, Ray Zingler puts it the best way. It's like we're not just building athletes; we're building fucking humans.
Hmm.
Like I bet that's a lesson that they carried on for the rest of their life. It's like just again could may not have been Yale on their chest, but they had that blue. They had that thing that set them apart from everyone else. Coach Mack always talks about the first thing he does when he walks into a new team is he sits everyone down and tells them what he expects from everyone. And like he holds himself to those same standards. Like if he's got this rule where if someone messes up, everyone's doing a down up.
Yeah.
If he
Yep.
messes up, he is doing a down up. And I've seen him do down ups. So it's like it's also being about what you believe and what expectations and just how you want the program to carry out and making that clear for them.
And I mean, they all got on board. They had a good season, right? Like they did well. I mean, they enjoyed the weight room. Obviously, like they wanted to be there to lift. It's like to have to have the understanding, like this isn't, you don't show up and get to be here, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
if you want to be in this room with everybody else that walks through, like we have to have the same standards as everybody else, right? Like we can't make a mockery of other teams that are here because we're club, right? We're allowed and able to be here, so let's make everything right, right? Like let's act like we are supposed to be here. So
Mm-hmm.
and they took that. I mean, there were definitely like some hiccups, along the way. They were like, you have kids show up and they're like, oh, I couldn't make it. I couldn't grab a blue shirt. And then you'd be like, all right, well, does anybody have a blue shirt today for this one coming in? Like, but like those are teaching moments. You know what I mean? Like it's, those aren't. I don't see them as like necessarily negatives. It's just like you have
Mm-hmm.
to uphold something in that moment. And you're like, hey, look, like if we're committed to being here, we set ourselves up for success. Like if we think we're going to run late to lift, like let me know. That's fine. Like I don't want you to be unaccounted for, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but also if you're going to be late and like you don't have the gear, like that's another conversation in of itself. It's like plan a little bit better. Put a blue shirt in your backpack before you even start the day, right?
Mm-hmm.
Lifts today. So, just things like that. So,
Yeah. In terms of sort of how did you what were the main differences between your program and between different, like if you had club or then the collegiate setting, how would that program and systems be different, and what would you do?
you're talking like just like pure like prescription,
Yeah.
I guess. Yeah. Honestly, like, I mean, like I said, like for the rugby team, a lot of the kids, like some kids were athletes and some kids weren't. Like they weren't athletes growing up, or they were like, they played some high school ball, but like it wasn't at a high level, and it wasn't like anything ridiculous. So like for them, it was more so let's like assess who can do something advanced, and like let's just assess like who needs to learn how to squat, right? So I really set myself up to be like, all right, these are the people that I can trust to move and move with quality, and like these are the people that like I'm gonna have to keep an eye on and like really take through some like coaching to start. So um, knowing that, and oftentimes it was either just myself and a few interns that were able to stick around late because like they were the last lift of the day, and we would just kind of go through. We'd have like a basic end where I would spend some time. We'd have like an intermediate advanced area that I would put in the middle that I could still keep an eye on, and then we'd have like maybe some people that like really need some technical work, or sorry, don't need some technical work, but aren't going to do anything crazy. Like I might have a few interns be able to float over there, knowing that like they'll be able to take care of their own lift on their own. So putting a program in place that allows for people to thrive, given what they need, their strength level, their lifting ability, like where they are at training age, right? But also having to like sub that down for you know people that came in the door that just had never really been in a weight room in a structured setting. And I did do that also with a lot of college teams, right? With like D1, where you'd expect people to come in and just like perform at an athletic D1 level.
Mhm.
You get a lot of people that come in and just their movement patterns are all over the place. Like they don't necessarily know how to squat, like they don't know how to bench, like which is fine. So I took a lot of those same principles from like the club program where you saw a larger portion of the people just not really have great movement efficiency in the weight room, and applied that to the college setting. Granted, those athletes did pick it up a little bit quicker, which led to more advanced programming, and I guess more, more variety in the program. Whereas like I really stuck to the basics with rugby. It was like starting strength, Texas method, and then we'd go into maybe some advanced stuff in velocity, but like that was only after like they were really like locked in. So, but yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's anything that was like the principles were really the same, right?
Mhm.
Right, like foundation of strength, and then you know move things
Movement
fast.
quality.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, movement quality, foundation of strength, move things fast. Maybe some different movement patterns or movement planes that are more specific to that sport. But I mean, realistically, just approached it with the same mindset. Like we need to be on the same page first, standards, fundamentals, then programming can kind of follow after that and kind of
Mhm.
take suit with whatever sport it is. So
Yeah. How has this sort of experience molded and shaped the way that you do your current job and the way that you look at helping other coaches formulate um, this application that we can perform and do our job easier and faster.
Yeah, I think a lot of it has. I mean, I try to yeah, approach it with an open mind, knowing that like there's not one way to do everything,
Hmm.
um, and also knowing that like not every context is going to allow the ability to do what I did or what a coach down the road does or what a coach at a Power Five does at the professional level does. Right? Like there's going to be so many different variables that will dictate and necessitate certain responses, certain approaches to the athlete, to the just performance in general. Um, so that's also how I approached programming and coaching the teams. Right, like every team's a little bit different. They have different cultures, they have different backgrounds, they have different views on performance, they have different views on the weight room, they have different views just in general, and that culminates to a weight room culture. In the soccer program, that's different than the football program. That's different than the volleyball team. Right, like it's all those things need to be considered and understood. So when approaching like building something for a broad market and a broad spectrum, like what are the things that we can refer back to? And when you refer back to what works in coaching and it works with building cultures, it's the foundations. It's just making sure that things are squared away. So finding the small things that can help coaches just square a few things away from a data perspective, and what's just a minimal amount of information that can lead to conversation, um,
Hmm.
is really kind of like how I approach ways to develop, or helping kind of the developmental process, because I don't want to say that I develop anything necessarily. Just how the development process can take hold with the consideration that this has to go out to people with all different contexts, all different kind of cultures, that are going to utilize this maybe in a very similar fashion, but what purpose does it serve? So, um, I think just working with the abundance of teams that I have has definitely helped me to keep like an open mind and understanding like there are foundational things that are going to be the same that can help a broad spectrum of people, and really kind of trying to hone in on those details that can help people kind of push that further. And then that's when you get feedback,
Hmm.
and that's when you can kind of make things curtail things a little bit differently.
Yeah, you also do quite a lot of speaking engagements and different types of science and data. And how does that sort of tie in with what you do and what you've previously done?
I think really it allows for different avenues of conversation, right? Like, I mean, a lot of the times if I do end up at a speaking engagement or talking through things, or um, people might reach out and be like, "Hey, have you ever considered this?" Or like, "Hey, like I, love the point you made," or I kind of disagree with the point you made, and then have you considered this? It just I'm very open to all of that, right? Like it's because in reality, like everyone's trying to accomplish something very similar. Like they want to help athletes, clients achieve some sort of success, and they have to go about it their own way to do it. Um, so I don't claim to know everything or every avenue to kind of go down. So I think just being more involved and kind of listening to people's perspectives and thoughts on things definitely, through these speaking engagements definitely helps in that
Yeah.
regard.
What's some resources that you would recommend coaches read or sort of get into to develop their skills in this industry?
Yeah, I mean, anything that really kind of goes back to like the start of our industry is great. Like we would always start our internship with you know reading up on the history of strength and conditioning, like where it all started from. Not that it like is the way to do things, right? Necessarily, like it's just understanding the history of our profession, where it started with like Boyd, Nebraska, obviously for college strength and conditioning specifically, but also like you can look at like the fitness industry in and of itself and like where it started and where it's grown to. Um, Understanding kind of like the foundation, what the necessity was, why we do what we do, can help to at least like open up some understanding of how people got to the thought processes that they currently are at, right? Because it all started from a very small foundation of wanting to perform better, right? And how did they go about that thought process? So we would look a lot of original stuff from like Boyd, Bill Kramer. We really kind of were fortunate enough to have a good relationship with Dr. Kramer while we were at Yale. So I think looking back at any of the original kind of like textbooks, or we read and where we got the flexible nonlinear was the book by Bill Kramer and Stephen Fleck was the periodization. And I can't think of the exact name because it's a bit of a long title, but I can look it up real quick.
What was the other name? Kramer and
Stephen Fleck. Stephen Fleck. Optimizing strength training, designing nonlinear periodization workouts. Like that's a there's a lot of stuff in there that we found. Like there was almost positive. It was from this book, but they talked about kind of like waist measurement and body weights and uh, using that as just an indicator of like if someone's waist is decreasing in size and their body weight's going up, that's probably a good sign that they're putting on muscle mass and losing fat. Yeah, that's the one. So like we dove into that fall of end of summer, early fall semester of 2017 to build out the nonlinear programming um, for that spring season for the lacrosse team. Um, that's a good one because it just shows you where people's minds were at when
Mhm.
they didn't have technology, right? Like they didn't have DEXA scans. They did, I mean, they might have, but like I don't know how far back DEXA necessarily goes, but like it wasn't ubiquitous like it is now, where you might find it at a Power Five program that can shell out for that stuff. Um, so it just shows you where people's minds were at before they had access to these quick digitized,
Mhm.
data processing machines, right? So it's always a good kind of like just check on are you utilizing the resources you have, but also kind of like how you can administer programs. So I think that's a good one. Just anything that comes before the advent of a lot of tech definitely helps to kind of give you a good foundation to understand like how things were originally run and what you can start with and then eventually evolve to.
Mhm. Apart from researching into sort of like the history of SSC and how we started, what would be some advice that you would give new coaches or coaches coming into this industry?
Yeah. I mean, I would always say to like, athletes that step in the weight room for the first time, or not athletes, sorry, the
Coaches.
interns that would step into the weight room. Yeah, coaches that would they're like they wanted their they're there because they want to be a coach at some capacity, some level. Um, Particularly the ones that like came in with from an exercise science program. Like you can read about sets and reps and like what to do in certain situations from a textbook, but as soon as you step in front of an athlete, like you're not reading a textbook anymore. You're reading a person. Like that's a person, right? Like
Mhm.
it's no longer it's no longer words on a page, right? It's you're dealing with someone with you know a length of experience in their own right, right? And it's sure you can say every anatomical position to them, but like at the end of the day, like your job is to kind of get them motivated to move and
Mhm.
then move in the right capacity and then move under progressive overload and then move under other stimuli and other instances and different planes and patterns, right? So it's like sure the foundation is there, but like for young coaches that are looking to get into the game, it's like I think our as much of a science of biomechanics and just like like overload on the system and kind
Mhm.
of creating
Physiology.
adaptations for us. It's psychology too, right? Like it's more than just
Physiology.
physiology. Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
But also yes, psychology. Like just
Yeah.
understanding like motivation and understanding like how to be present in a room without being overbearing. Like just learning how to be a physical
Mhm.
presence of a coach. So
Again,
because I
not
think
to be
yeah,
the
go ahead.
drum again, but the 3x5 hugs.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like positive touch, right? Like we would always say that too for like, high fives, make sure like you're going by congratulating people, even if it's like something small. It's just being a support system, um, around for the people around you. I think sometimes it's yeah, we would say see this all the time. It's like you want to come in and flex your knowledge, but like,
Mhm.
nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. And I always say that in probably every speaking engagement that I go into, but like that's something from Tom Newman. He would say that to us all the time, right? So it's that's
No,
vital.
100%. And like I'm always very blessed that I read Conscious Coaching as the first like industry book, and that set the tone for how I approach the training from then on. Like I try and identify who I have, what their needs are. There
Mhm.
was another episode I did with Sachin McDonald, and he introduced me to this notion where it's like a fist bump can tell you a lot about how your athlete is coming in. Like if he comes in and just gives you a half-assed fist bump or a handshake or whatever you do, like chances are there is something happening on the background.
Right.
So do we investigate or do we just let them go? Like again, it also depends on the person, but like you can always keep an eye. You can always, and again, flexible non-linear. you could make them do jumps and see where they are. If they're fucking good, let's roll ball. If not, let's let's try and dig down deep a little bit more and try and understand what's going on.
100%. I love that. I totally get where they're coming from. That's great.
Now we've already mentioned it, but what hell are you dying on in this industry?
Oh, I mean, yeah, I think it's for strength and conditioning specifically. Uh, it's just the modification in weight room on the day, and I don't necessarily know if what we did was like 100% right, 100% perfect. Like we obviously we did see success in the weight room in season for teams that predominantly maybe would have shrugged off some real aggressive training, quote unquote aggressive training for that time of year. Um, we were able to develop people in season, and we were able to develop that paid dividends in the off season when we really got after it. So uh, I think it's just it's tough to, especially at the college setting, and even now the high school setting, like private training. Like I did that for a little bit after leaving Yale, and like these kids are playing 3 sports in a single
Mhm,
season, and like they're going from practice, they go from school to practice to weight room to practice, and then it's just it's insane. But to say that like someone can come in every single day and do this idyllic program that you've set forth, and there's no deviation, and there will never be deviation, like that's, I don't know,
mhm.
it's becoming
It's not.
harder and harder for me to see and believe, right? Like,
It's nuts.
so, but
No,
um
it's also like it then becomes a load management problem. Now,
right,
I always agree that if you're programming for a sport, your athletes should be able to do at least another half or another quarter on top of what their demands are. Like I
yeah,
want my athletes to still be as fresh at the end. Again, no, it's not always possible. I
right,
also understand, but that's the sort of mind frame that I go into. I want you to get to the dark side and still be able to perform. And now with kids that are playing 3, 4 different sports
yeah,
at high levels, like injuries, injury rates are going up. Like
right,
they're not able to recover. They're not able to fuel sufficiently for what they're doing. Like it becomes a host of problems because we're not thinking of, okay, like is my kid at least rested enough to go on and do this next training session? Probably not. Like
right,
kids should be in multi sports, but it should be in a thought out process that okay, one day they do one, next day they do another, or they have a rest day. Second day they have one. Like it's a like it needs to be thought out, and I get that people are trying to. And again, the specialization of kids at this point is fucking ridiculous.
yeah,
Like I don't care what your goal for your kid is, but like let him also be a fucking kid.
absolutely, yeah, yeah. Don't take that time away, you
Hmm.
know what I mean? It's just it's it's a lot. And like I like how you said, like you want them to be ready to go for like another half or another quarter,
Hmm.
right? Like it's like, to me, that's a great gauge. Like you're saying, like you're setting them up to recover from what they've done, right? Because
Hmm.
you didn't push them to the edge, right? They, at times during the workout, I'm sure they felt like they were close to like the
Hmm.
edge, right? um but in summation of everything, right, they just, like, that's not where you want to be. And we would always explain it to our athletes. It's like, you've arrived, you're here for the workout for the day. That's half the battle, right? We need to make sure when you leave here, you're still ready for the next workout that we're going to have 2 days
Hmm.
from now. I can't have you come in and saying you're still completely wrecked from this workout, because like then we lose time, right? So
Hmm.
I exactly like what you're saying. It's just like making sure they're ready to recover, because
It's also like having the processes before their workouts. Like
yeah,
my like in my head, there's a checklist: fist bump. What have you ate today? How much have you drank? Did you sleep well?
yeah,
Like very quick questions that you can answer in a couple seconds, and it tells me more about how your day has went than then I can make the adjustments. Because like I'm not going to be the dickhead that gives you more when you can't.
right,
Like I'm going to make sure that you're at least able to fucking do the training session. I always say like again, I get that most people are on the fence of going percent based for their sets or RPE based or whatever your chosen method is. I like percentage basis because I do want my athletes to at least push and push hard at some points. Like that fluctuation is good. Like it
Right.
teaches them resilience as well.
Yeah.
So if I have an athlete that's due an 85 to 90% lift that session, but they've came in and said, I've had a shit day, barely slept, had an argument, whatever the case may be, I'm going to adjust and I'm going to go RPE based. Okay, you're feeling we're supposed to do 90%, but can you give me like 90% of your current RPE?
Hmm.
Like whatever 90% for you right now feels like, that's what we're doing. And it could just be the fucking empty bar. That's it.
Right.
And I'm like, okay, I'm happy I got my 90% and they're happy because they got in and done it. Like
Right.
it's not again, it's being flexible with your programming. You can't be married to one thing because
Right.
humans, like you mentioned before, we're not a textbook. We're not under the same um, restrictions as research. Like
Yeah.
we,
Yeah.
we can't control every variable every single time that someone comes in. So to expect that in a weight room is fucking ridiculous.
Yeah. I 100% agree. It's, and I think a lot of the time, um, you know, it's scary to deviate, right? Because you've been told that,
Mm,
like, if you do X, Y, and Z, you can expect X, Y, and Z results. But when you start doing X on one day and then you have to go all the way to A the next day, you're like, well, that's not part of what I was told would work, right? And then you really like, it's like, it was tough for me in the beginning, um, but once you start to see it unfold, and it just
mhm,
makes so much sense because, again, like, adaptation doesn't happen in the third rep of the fifth set. It happens
mhm,
because they recovered from that exposure, right? So if we're putting them in a hole, more than they can dig themselves out of with their eating patterns, sleeping patterns, so on and so
mhm,
forth, like, you're not going to get adaptation, right? Like, you're not going to drive it. So that's why, in turn and in time, it made so much more sense to me looking at it that way, right? Like, you're trying to set them up to recover,
mhm.
given what they're presenting with. So
Yeah, and I completely like agree with the you need to push your athletes as hard as you
yeah,
can sometimes, but like you're also allowed to fucking give them an easy session. Like it'll probably do them more good than fucking not.
right,
And like even
absolutely,
recovery, if I've got athletes that are performing, I'm going to give them active recovery. Like I just
right,
want you to move. Just move. I don't care if it's walking, I don't care if it's a gentle cycle. I don't care what it is, a row, whatever you want to do. Just get your body moving.
yeah. I mean, I remember there was one time, had a goalie come in on a Sunday lift after a game, and they had lost, and like, he had a pretty poor performance. So, like, he just wasn't ready, right, to lift. And I remember I gave him just mini band, big band stretches, like, just a list of things that was like, effectively, it was just a warm up. Like, it was like an hour long warm up, effectively. And I remember after the lift, he was like, I needed that. He's like, I
Mhm,
really needed that today. And, you know, that lack of weights that day adds like four or five more instances where you can be like,
mhm,
hey, are you really feel that bad today? Or, like, can we push through today? Because they know that you have their back, right?
mhm.
And I think that's, art of coaching, right? That's not
Yep.
numbers, right? So it's, you're just, again, like, the best interest of the athlete is often in the eyes of the athlete, right? So it's like, you're
Mhm,
trying to match that energy when they come in, and making sure that, like, they can get what they need that day, knowing that you can push them some days, but, like, there's some days that, like, you just don't want to touch, right? And they'll be honest with you. So, and
mhm,
sometimes it takes longer than others. Sometimes people respond to that right away. Sometimes you might get people that want to game the system a little bit, be like, oh, I don't feel like doing anything today. But, usually you can sniff that out. So
mhm. Oh, I've had some experiences where
definitely happens.
you're trying shit.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's, hey, it is what it
But
is.
yeah, it becomes an issue, and I'm lucky that I can sort of at this like right now I can pick and choose
Yeah.
like, who comes in, like because like yeah, if you're not serious about performing, then it's kind of hard to get you to go to that next level because if you don't want to, then I'm not going to be able to to perform for you. Like
Yeah.
I always say to my athletes, like every success that you have is yours because you got
Right.
in, you did the reps, you did the sets. I was just there watching. Like
Yeah.
that's kind of what coaching is. Although I give them plan, sure, but like they did it.
Not 100. I mean, oftentimes people would ask what like the best program is, and sometimes like the best program is the one that's just stuck to. And it's like if you're gonna be flexible on a regular basis, like we're gonna stick to the fact that like we need to be flexible on a regular basis. If we're gonna be
Mhm.
rigid and we want to push through, like we have to be rigid and push through. Like I think really just again it comes back to expectations. Like if I would, and we did this a lot as a staff too, but like before the season started, we'd have a presentation on what was going to be set forth for them in the weight room,
Mhm.
right? Like these are
There's
the expectations. Like
expectations.
this is a plan we're rolling with, right? Like this is, and we would oftentimes really open up the annual plan to them before the start of their off season, quote unquote, or the weight room in season, right? And we would say like, this is my, this is 365 for you. This is where I expect everyone to kind of be. This is what I expect everyone to follow. It may not look like a straight line, going out in the upward direction. It might, we might have some peaks and valleys, but this is the expectation, and this is the program you're going to see day one, starting tomorrow or next week or whatever it was, and then this is the one you're going to see in the second half of the semester, and then this is what it's going to be for the summer when you all go home, right? Or like this is what it's going to be for the winter. Um, so it allows like you to have those conversations up front, and but like again, it just sets the expectation, and like
Mm.
that's when you can have conversations about where the deviations can happen, or if there can be deviations, right? So
100%. I also think it's important to be clear that although we make exceptions, it's not all the time, nor can it be all the time. Like
exactly. Yep.
you still need them to perform. Like if a kid's coming in and again goes on to maybe identifying like what their nutrition is like, what their sleeping is like, what their
Right.
recovery looks like, trying to fix that so that when they come to the weight room, we can't push them. And although they might be hitting the reds or oranges, like we can get them to a point that we can't push them and make
Right.
sure that, like especially like when it comes to like exam seasons and tests and whatnot, like you just can't control that. Like
Right.
you might have this perfect periodized program and perfect year plan, but like the tests are the tests. Like they're student athletes at that point, so like you can't you can't just not do the test. Like they still
Right.
need the education at the end.
Yeah. Because if they don't pass the test, then they're not going to be there the next semester to be in the weight room. So it's kind of a moot
Yeah.
point, right? So
Yeah. No, I really appreciate you for coming on, Tofi. It's always a
definitely.
pleasure to sit down with you and shoot some chat. If you let everyone know where they can find you and ask questions and sort of pick your brain.
Yeah. Yeah. LinkedIn. It's the name at the bottom of the screen. Instagram. There you go. T underscores and Nikki. So definitely feel free to shoot me a DM. Any questions? Always happy to talk. You know, or if you want just like kind of shoot some ideas across me, always happy to help any way I can.
Perfect. Peace.